that I got from Francis Schaeffer, who was a well-known Christian apologist from the 1970s, 60s and 70s, and he says that there are two ways that people look at different kinds of ideas, and this is the two different kinds of truth. Remember Professor Hardnoggin's list at the beginning of the hour, where he had the evidence, science, facts side, and then you had the religious superstition stuff. Well, this is another way of looking at that. Actually, faith, values, beliefs, morals, religion, we're saying that these things are real. There's some objective truths to be handled here. It's not all just fantasy and made up. And it helps us, these kind of principles, help us make sense of what I call the lower story here, the particulars, reason, knowledge, science. So in a Christian worldview, these things, the universals and the particulars, the upper story and the lower story of the house, they're connected. Okay? This is Jesus' view of reality, that they inform each other, that my faith and values, my confidence in what's true and what reality is, helps me make sense of these other things and helps me make decisions. Now, the secular view is this: a separation between the two. And this helps explain a lot when you hear people talking about faith, values, beliefs, morals, and religion. That this is in a completely separate category. It has no connection whatsoever with the real world the people live in. They're separate and they're unequal. It is famously illustrated by paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould, who is passed on now. But he realized that there was some tension between faith and science, and he proposed a solution. He said, these science and religion deal with two completely separate things, and they're both legitimate. Religion deals with this, and science deals with this. And if we just let each of them stay in their own domain, everybody will be happy. You can be religious on Sunday mornings, but don't let your religion get into the laboratory. You can be, talk about your values and morals on Sundays or in your Bible studies, but if you're a politician, you shouldn't let that affect public policy. This is Jesus' view of reality, is that they're not separate. But when you hear people discuss it nowadays, just keep in mind, they have this in mind. Most of the time, just about everyone has this in mind. So if that's the case, just a couple examples, we got 5 minutes. A Roman Catholic politician who supports abortion rights. Okay, the Roman Catholic Church is against abortion, right? Well, somebody who claims to be a Roman Catholic and yet supports abortion rights, they've got a disconnect. Okay? They got the upper story, oh yes, I'm a good Catholic. They got the lower story of reality, I got to make decisions in the real world. The two don't connect. Okay, this is another similar kind of thing. How about this? A Christian who claims there are good linguistic reasons for thinking that Noah's flood was local to the Middle East. Okay? So a lot of Christians read the Bible and say, it says the flood covered the whole earth. So that must mean the entire planet at the same time. And this guy says, no, I've read some of the original languages, and I think that it could mean that it was a local flood. Is that a disconnect? No, because he's taking seriously the idea that his the biblical view of reality is correct. It has to do with how the language is being interpreted and what boundaries there are there. So it's not rejecting the Bible in the real world. It's trying to apply biblical principles in the real world in a way that's different than a different Christian. How about this? We celebrate all religions at our school and encourage students to keep in touch with their own religious traditions. Does that have a connection or a disconnection between the upper story? I think that's a great observation. Because what people mean by religion sometimes is cultural traditions. Okay? You know, everyone's got their cultural traditions. We can encourage them, their heritage, their whatever. Where the disconnect comes, which is what I think the rest of you were thinking, is if you're claiming that all religions are equally valid or equally true. So that's a disconnect, because then you're saying that they're out of touch with reality. It really doesn't matter what the facts are. Everyone has their own religious ideas, and that's great. So there's two ways to look at this, depending on what you mean by these terms. Okay, well, to summarize here, this is what we discussed today. What faith is. So a biblical faith is one that has reasons and that does something. Okay? You have acting according to what you have good reason to believe is true. That's biblical faith. We talked about objective versus subjective truth, and the idea that the Christian worldview claims that at least some spiritual assertions are objectively true. That Jesus told us some things about religion and morality that were objectively true. Didn't depend on the person. And that his view is that both the upper story and lower story are connected in a unified reality. That's how he views the world. And it takes a little more effort for us nowadays because all of the cultural flow is completely against this. But if we train ourselves to be observant, I think we can recognize when this is going on and think in Jesus' terms instead.